Okay, we're not live.
Okay.
Well, before we start the meeting, I hope that somebody brought some virtual cookies to hand out.
Looks like they're gonna get some.
To put them in the packet when they deliver them.
This one is not on.
Hmm.
Oh. You turn it off. Perfect. Thank you. Air conditioning in December. Wow. What a concept. Where's-
Right.
It's already live and
Okay.
unmuted and everything. So.
Commission members, about an hour and a half ago, I sent you an email with a minor item that we added to the agenda. Just so you're aware, in case you need to check your email to follow up on it. It's an easement plat for a forest con plan already approved by you all with minor changes. So I'm just letting you know in case you haven't checked your email in the last hour and a half. I assume you can hear me. We just have these four right now.
Mhm.
Okay,
Just had everything.
just everybody. Okay. And I'll re-announce after the rest of them get in.
We have Ed Sharp. Oh, here's Chris. I don't see Colin. Sorry. Everybody's here. You go ahead and put back on and. Yeah, I don't see Colin. Right?
I've already taken.
I know, we put it there, whatever, but
Good evening. This is the Planning Commission meeting of December the 9th, 2020. And with us at the moment, as we begin the meeting, myself, Doug Wright as chairman. I have Chris Davis as a Planning Commission member, Jim Stone, Ron Thomas, Judy Wheeler. We might have two more maybe joining us. Hopefully that's soon. So we do have a quorum. Also with us at City Hall, Stephen Bachmiller, our zoning administrator, Megan Flick, city planner, and Debbie Calhoun, who runs the whole show. First thing on the agenda tonight is the public review meeting for Land Management Code 2020 amendments. I will first outline how we're going to conduct this, at least as best as I can in these current times. We'll first have testimony by staff describing those amendments and why we're considering them and why they're being proposed. Then I'll open the floor to the public as required. First, I will entertain those who are in favor and then those who are opposed. If there's any follow-up to any of those comments and questions, well, I'll close the meeting. And then if there's the public I'll close the public testimony. And then if there are any follow-up comments, whatever from city staff, we'll have those. I'm sure staff also will post for the minutes the filings and the advertisement notices and everything else as required by law. After this meeting, after we close this portion of the meeting, the commission will probably make a motion and pass a motion that the record will remain open for a certain number of days for additional testimony in writing to the planning staff. And then at a subsequent meeting, the planning commission will review those comments as well as those received tonight and make a final recommendation to the mayor and council. They will start the process then again all over. They will have their own public meeting following basically the same format before final decisions are made and these amendments are adopted into our ordinance. So to start off then, I will call on Steve Bachmiller.
Okay, this is zoning text amendment case 2020-01. This is the annual comprehensive package of land management code amendments for the year 2020. There are 15 proposals, which I will summarize one by one. I'm not going to read them verbatim. I'll enter the actual cover memo and the actual proposals themselves into the record by reference. Proposal number 1. It affects the Article 4, Section Z. It's merely renumbering the charts from lettering formats A and B to charts 1 and 2. Proposal number 2 is to add into the ordinance a parking requirement for drive-in or walk-up restaurant or food service, basically restaurants that don't have indoor seating, which is what we typically calculate parking requirements on. This previously was in the zoning ordinance, but for some reason in the recent amendment, it fell out of the ordinance through an editing error, so it's being reinserted as it previously existed. Proposal number 3 is a housekeeping item that makes consistent the language describing adult entertainment businesses. That is defined in Article 3, the definition section of the ordinance. However, it is interchangeably referred to in the ordinance as just adult businesses and adult entertainment businesses. Where it's adult businesses, we're adding the word entertainment so it's uniform across the entire document. Proposal number 4. This is a proposal to change the language slightly in the forest conservation ordinance. The existing model ordinance that the state has given us to adopt, the language is a bit confusing. So we are rewriting one line of it when it comes to the requirement for providing twice as much forest conservation when you're addressing the requirements of the ordinance at an off-site location. Doesn't change the content at all. It basically just makes the language more reader friendly. And as required by the ordinance, this provision This proposed provision has been forwarded to the Department of Natural Resources about 6 weeks ago. We have heard nothing back from them, and I've had previous conversations with them, and I don't think they're particularly concerned, just so long as it essentially says the same thing, just in different words, which is what we're doing. Proposal number 5 is a proposal to define small-scale breweries, distilleries, and wineries, and then include them in the land use chart in certain zoning districts. Proposal number 6 is a proposal to add certain uses to the land use chart, mostly in the CG zoning district, but a couple others in the CCMU, CR, and IR zoning districts. Proposal number 7 is making some minor adjustments to the parking requirements for warehouses and wholesale establishments and for manufacturing plants. Proposal number 8, this creates an exemption to the provision in the fence regulations in the zoning ordinance. Currently, if you have a side lot, a side street or a rear street that is a higher road classification than the street that the house fronts on, that side street or rear street still continues to be considered a front, and so the front yard setbacks, if it was a same level of or lower street classification, then that side street to the rear face of the house would be treated as a rear yard for fences. Basically, it's dealing with fence height. But what this does is, if the property line is adjacent to the municipal boundary and the adjoining street is actually in the county, it does not apply. 2020-09 is some revisions to the provisions associated with development and use of lots in residential districts that do not front public streets. Currently, the zoning ordinance does not allow construction of a house on a lot that does not front a public street. There is a provision that will allow garages and storage buildings to be built under certain circumstances on lots that do not front public streets. And we found a couple of peculiarities in it dealing with, wasn't real user friendly for addressing existing buildings. It was kind of written to deal, with new buildings. And so we're adjusting the language a bit to make it more comprehensive and address both the use of those properties that may have an existing building on them, but also properties that are unimproved that somebody may be looking to build a building on. Proposal number 10 is an adjustment to the new provisions regarding large accessory buildings on large lots adopted in 2019. We've had one property that has taken advantage of this. So we've had kind of one test case to work with, and we found there was a couple wrinkles in it. We're just smoothing those out. 2020-11 is a proposal that codifies an interpretation that I've already made as a zoning administrator. This is dealing with the minimum square footage requirements for new dwelling units in the city. They vary depending on how many bedrooms there are in the proposed unit. And we have interpreted that where when you're dealing with retrofitting an existing building, where you're dealing with peculiarly shaped buildings or spaces that are broken up by load-bearing walls that can't be moved, etc., that there needs to be some flexibility on how these are designed. So we're adding a provision that basically allows the zoning administrator to make minor adjustments to these under those circumstances, as it will be what has been administered to this point will continue to be. If other units are larger than the minimum, then some of that can be credited toward reducing the size on some unit due to some unique physical condition associated with the building. 2020-12 consolidates all references to buffers within buffer widths into Article 5, making them subject to waiver deviation instead of having to go into the Board of Zoning Appeals. There are 6 places in the zoning ordinance where buffers are mentioned, and each are addressed here. In some cases, no change is necessary because it's kind of just a reference as opposed to an actual regulation. Effective pages are listed at the head of that particular page, and there's by the time we do those 6 changes, there's about that proposal covers about 4 pages of the packet. But basically takes up all references to regulations associated with buffers and puts them completely under the purview of the Planning Commission, takes it away from the Board of Zoning Appeals. We've notified the BZA of this. They have offered no comment or objection to this point. 2020-13 is to clarify language about deadlines for Planning Commission review and approval. We found some archaic language in dealing with final plat approval, so we're just tweaking that a little bit. 2020-14 is to set standard paving thicknesses for parking and driveways. The depths that are proposed, which is 3 inches for asphalt, 6 inches for concrete, are recommended by the city engineer. And then lastly, number 15 is a proposal updating references to the comprehensive plan regarding effective dates. We add, make a couple of, we break what's now currently 1 paragraph into 3 smaller paragraphs. So it makes it easier to follow and read. Changes a couple of the dates, updating references to the current comprehensive plan, and then adds a new paragraph, or to correct myself, it identifies the previous comprehensive plan, and then we add a paragraph referring to the comprehensive plan currently in effect. This package was advertised in accordance with requirements. I enter that into the record by reference. And I will just say that the package that we have this year, for the first time, is significantly smaller than it has been in the past, because we were basically revising and updating sections of the substantial policy sections of the ordinance each year for several years. We're kind of beyond that at this point. So this is the first year where the amendment package is consistent with what we anticipated ultimately it would become, and hopefully it will continue this way in the future. That's all I have.
I've unmute myself, sorry. Can I ask that you kind of expand a little bit on number 5, number 6? You kind of went over those kind of fast.
Okay, number 5 is one associated with small scale breweries, distilleries, and wineries. This is an item that is currently not addressed in our zoning ordinance. So we've had to kind of do interpretations to fit it in the ordinance, as we have started receiving some inquiries about opening such businesses in the city. This is a growing industry. Been a hole in our ordinance. So basically what we're doing is we are specifically calling out or defining what a small scale brewery, distillery, or winery is. I'll read that into the record. It's an establishment 15,000 square feet or less in building area, whose purpose is the production, storage, distillation, manufacturing, processing, distribution, and wholesale and retail sale of beer, liquor, wine, mead, and/or hard cider made from products, produce grown or produced off-site, and for tours, tastings, on-premise consumption of the products, and sales for carryout. Use may include transient food trucks to support the tasting room activity. Such establishments shall be in compliance with any and all local and state liquor laws and licensing requirements and health department regulations, and shall possess any and all licenses which may be required by Washington County, the city of Hagerstown, and the state of Maryland. It creates a parking requirement of 1 space per 50 gross square feet of tasting room or similar public spaces. And for the manufacturing and/or warehouse area, the greater of 1 space per employee on the maximum working shift, or 1 space per 1,000 gross square feet. In the zoning chart, a small scale brewery, distillery, or winery, 15,000 gross square feet or less of building area, with or without outdoor tables and no outdoor speaking system, would be a permitted use in the CCNU district and its conversion overlay zoning district. A small scale brewery, distillery, or winery, 15,000 square feet or less in building area, in industrial buildings built before October 1st, 1956, with or without outdoor tables and no outdoor speaking systems, would be a special exception use in the CG, POM, IR, and IG zoning districts.
Thank you.
Number 6 is adding certain uses to the use chart, mostly focusing on the CG zoning district. And they are as follows. Adult daycare with vocational centers. It's already permitted in several districts. It will be added to the CG commercial general district. Carpet and upholstery cleaning services, also permitted in other districts, will now also be permitted in the CG district. Visual and performing arts studios, currently available mostly in the downtown area, but they would now also be permitted in the CG, CR commercial regional, and IR industrial restricted zoning districts. Performing arts companies would now be permitted in the CG zoning district. Medical and diagnostic laboratories would also now be permitted in the CG zoning district. Commercial and private membership outdoor swimming pools, provided the pool meets certain distance requirements, would be a permitted use in the CG zoning district. And then lastly, we add a new use in anticipation of potential changes to Maryland state law. We add a new use to the chart as follows. Gambling establishments as defined, permitted, regulated, and licensed by the state of Maryland, including casinos, sports betting parlors, and similar facilities. They would be permitted in the CCMU zoning district or the CG commercial general district.
Thank you. I would like the record to share that Shelley's joined us. Shelley McIntyre, welcome, at 7:16. So she's now part of our meeting. Are there any questions of the staff?
Steve, on 20-03, in the justification, the sentence that says, in order to ensure all technology is consistent, you have add entertainment to the two places the term is used. Should it be is not used? Should you have in there that what you're doing is you're adding entertainment to the two areas that are it's not used in now?
See what you're saying. Okay. We can fix that before it goes to the mayor and council.
That's just a little thing there, because it's acting like it's not used, that it's used already and you're not using it or whatever.
Right.
Okay.
I could have been clearer on that. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have a question concerning item number 5. When we talked about this, and my memory may not be right, I thought that we were going to permit the small scale breweries that are located in existing buildings. I thought we were going to permit that of right in the downtown mixed use.
It's not necessary because it's by right in any building downtown.
What do you mean?
If you look
It doesn't show as a principal permitted use.
If you look at the line above it, it's the same thing, just without the wording about the buildings built before 1956. It's a permitted use, that the building isn't limited to being one and built before 56.
Okay, they're not mutually exclusive definitions.
Right.
Okay, sorry. All right.
Thank you, Jim. Are there other questions or comments? Then I'll open this meeting up for public testimony. I'd like to first hear from those who are in favor of these, or let's just open it up. Who's registered to speak?
We have Jim Castillo.
All right, Jim.
As far as I know, he's the only person who has stated they wanted to participate.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I've unmuted myself.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. I don't have your agenda today, so I'm going to go off of the Land Management Code text amendment proposal and read those articles, if that should work. on the number 5, which we were just discussing, I have a couple of comments. I spoke to Steve at some length about this, and he said that your commission was most interested in pushing this kind of use downtown. And that is why there was no special exception that was allowed for a new project. And that was done by the special exceptions always having to be in a building built before October 1956. And I would say, as just somebody who has ridden the latest economic waves, that there is very little knowledge and mostly guesswork about where we are going with the economy and where we are going with particular uses. Steve was right when he said that this is a use that has had a lot of growth lately, but it's haphazard and it is somewhat mom and pop, not corporate. And I think that the city is losing an opportunity by not allowing a special exception in the CRCG in the home district, because by making it a special exception, and that would be under the first one that doesn't have the October 1956 requirement. By making it a special exception, the planning commission would have a view of what was being offered. It would have a chance for a conversation about why wouldn't you put this here if the planning commission wanted to, and it would open up, I believe, a potential opportunity to grow Hagerstown instead of putting a roadblock into this use by forcing it to be downtown.
Jim, I missed the third district that you would like us to consider. I got CR, CG, and what's the third one?
Oh, the POM.
Okay, thanks.
And just as a side note to this, both of these amendments say that there should be no outside music. And I understand the sensibility to outside music completely, but I would say that it would be much more efficient to deal with outside music by putting a decibel limit in it. And in addition to a decibel limit, to have an hour at which it has to be completely shut off. And the reason I say that is because there are many corporate restaurants, not necessarily these type, but other corporate entities that would, as part of their lease with a developer, they would say, I need X number of outside seats and I need this outside music, because it's part of the atmosphere they're trying to present to the customers. So even if you don't agree with me on my first objection, I think you should add that into the ordinance on the second side, so that you could at least give the best opportunity to get these tenants into Hagerstown.
Okay. Anything else you want to comment on?
I should, yes, there are a couple other things. Somehow I've sat on my telephone and lost it.
Oh, geez.
Excuse me if my working from home is not as proficient as it might be. These are some other ones farther down the list. And once again, excuse me if I go through my pages here. On the page 5 of what the sheets were that Steve printed out, which is zoning, off-street parking, and parking requirement chart. It has parking for manufacturer or distributor, and it is a gross calculation of parking rather than a net calculation of parking. And the reason I believe that is significant is if you look at many manufacturing or light industrial kinds of businesses, much of the floor space is occupied by permanently installed machines, storage facilities, offices, cafeterias, and to do it as a gross calculation creates a much greater parking lot. And I don't think that's good for the environment. I don't think it's good for the city, and I don't think it's good for the developer. And so I would encourage the city to relook at that as a more practical matter and put language in it that says, that it would be the net area minus things that occupy permanent floor space, and calculate the parking on that basis. And in addition, I would suggest, but I wouldn't strongly argue, that maybe a look at public transportation, which is available at those locations that you're calculating parking for, would be used as a component. Often in the international traffic engineers books, they look at those things so that we don't have great big parking lots that are just heat sinks and don't serve any good if they're not used.
I want to comment on that, Jim, if I could.
Yeah, sure.
In my pushing, I went towards doing it by gross square footage because that's the easiest to calculate. And things change. A new tenant comes in and rearranges the racking. The bus routes change. If we just do something permanent, boom. Now, if we have the numbers too high, we can certainly look at that. But as far as staff trying to maintain and do the calculations and keep them up to date and current, it's just too cumbersome.
Well, I don't disagree with that. Often shopping centers go through that calculation. Sometimes they can't make a deal with a particular tenant because of traffic demands. And so they have to either acquire other property or do something to accommodate that. I might suggest a middle ground, and that maybe you could create a gross area demand and not pave all of it for the initial use, but it would be grassed area that could be paved at a future time if a greater need of parking was demanded. It wouldn't change the area that the developer would need to have. It would just not create a bigger parking field than they need to have.
We'll take that into consideration. Thank you. Anything else?
Okay, and then I just had one more, and this sort of gets into the specifics of things. The last thing that Steve talked about was the requirement of 3 inches of asphalt or 6 inches of concrete as a minimum. I've built millions and millions and millions of square feet of parking spaces. The way you build a parking space or a road, State Highway Administration uses this all the time, is you take a series of CBRs, which are called California bearing ratios, and that gives you a value of the strength of the soil. And then you, after you have that CBR, then you have a soils engineer calculate the the depth of the parking that is required to do for parking or roadways or truck routes or whatever. And I would suggest that you add in this, instead of having these sort of up in the air minimums, that you say that a developer would have to do the CBR study on it and submit a paving spec to the city engineer for his approval. And I think what you're doing is you're leaving yourself out as by saying this is the minimum, leaving yourself open to having somebody do the minimum and then have some failures. And I think that you should do it the right way. And I know that's arguing against myself, but I think, and if you talk to Rodney, I think he would agree with that 100%.
All righty, thank you.
That's all I got to say.
All right,
Nice to see all of you again.
it's good seeing you. Hope you're feeling better.
I'm making progress.
All right, that's good. Anybody else who would like to speak?
President, we didn't have anybody else signed up.
Thank you very much.
In consideration of the statement that you would like to have outdoor speaker systems, that, in my opinion, would not be too practical in our downtown area, as many of the buildings down there have residential apartments on the upper floors. So you'd have to take that in consideration if you were going to allow outdoor speakers, and even putting a decimal rating on there or maximum still could be something that would be offensive to the renters.
Ron, that's a good comment, and I appreciate that, but we'll hold that discussion till we discuss this on our own at the subsequent meeting. How about that?
That's fine.
Thank you. I'm sure people will be happy to know that we're considering that. So I'd like to move that, or to entertain a motion to close the public testimony phase of this public review meeting.
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Debbie, you got all those? And now I will entertain a motion about holding the record open.
I move that we hold the record open for 15 days.
Second.
Motion, I never took a vote on closing the testimony. So all those in favor of closing the public testimony, please say aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposed? Okay, then those who are in favor of the motion to keep the record open for 15 days, please say aye.
Aye.
Who seconded that motion?
I'm sorry, what?
Who seconded that motion?
They all happen so fast, I don't know who did. Who wants to claim that second?
I'll claim it.
All righty. And Jim, you made it, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You ready to vote then? All those in favor, please say aye. We did that.
Yes.
Any opposed? None opposed. Both motions pass unanimously. And we will close then this portion of the meeting and move on to our regular meeting. I think we still, Colin has not joined us yet. So everybody's present except for Colin. So we'll move on to the approval of the minutes. The first one is September the 30th.
I move that we accept the minutes as presented for September 30th.
Second, this is Shelley.
Thank you. One thing that bothered or kind of struck me, on page 3, there are 3 bullet items. We were discussing wineries, et cetera, and tables. And that third bullet, I might have said that, but it doesn't make any sense. When you define the small scale brewery, instead of stating tables within 250 feet of a residence, tables should be at least 250 feet away from a road. That does make sense now that I read it. Excuse
Yeah.
me. I retract that.
Okay.
Any other discussion on the motion? Ready to vote? All those in favor of approving the minutes for September the 30th, please say aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposed? That passes unanimously. October 6th, we haven't gotten those yet. Correct? I have not seen them.
No, I haven't.
And so we'll move on then to the minutes from November the 4th, which I was absent for. Any
I'll
di-
move that we accept the minutes for November 4th.
Thank you.
Second,
Second is Jim. Any discussion, addition, corrections? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? And I will abstain. I'm abstaining. Okay. Now we have some development review cases, and we'll begin with Linwood Hollow re-subdivision.
Ed Schreiber is the engineer on that, so we'll need to bring him forward. And before I get started on this, for the members of the commission, for those who came and just after the meeting started, at about 5:30 or so, I sent you all an email with a minor item that we added to the agenda associated with the forest conservation with North Point. I'm just letting you know in case if you haven't checked your email since 5:30, you might want to just check because I provided you an email explanation and also a PDF attachment. That'll be the last thing that we deal with, but I just thought I'd let you know before you needed to go scrambling for it later. Okay. First item on the agenda is a final plat for the Linwood Hollow development. It's an abandonment of pre-existing residential subdivision S 2020-09. And excuse me, the file is S 2020-09 and revision to previously approved Forest Conservation Plan 2005-07. This property is located at the end of Sweeney Drive and the end of Linwood Road. Before I launch into the staff report, just give you a little bit of background. This is a townhouse development that was approved in a preliminary plat over 10 years ago. They started clearing the site and then the Great Recession hit and everything ground to a halt, and that's where it stayed for over a decade. This property was rezoned from residential to industrial as part of the comprehensive rezoning package, so you are familiar with it. And what they're doing here, in short, is they're abandoning everything associated with that residential subdivision. They're abandoning the townhouse lines, lot lines that were created, the street rights of way. So it'll essentially be one large parcel at this point. They don't have a development scheme for the property yet. It may be one of two things. It may be developed as a single industrial lot with would just be a site plan, or maybe perhaps they might end up doing an industrial subdivision where they'll go back and put the right of way that they're abandoning for Sweeney Drive back in to provide access to smaller lots within the developable area of the site. But they don't know this at this point. So all they're doing now is getting righteous with the long existing violations of the Forest Conservation Ordinance and abandoning the property lines to make it clear, ready for redevelopment. So with that, I'll launch into the staff report. This subdivision plat accomplishes two tasks. One, abandons lot lines and street rights of way platted to begin construction of Linwood Hollow townhouse development, creating a single parcel. And two, reconfigures the existing forest conservation plan and establishes a new conservation plan for the anticipated future development of the site consistent with the current industrial classification. No plan of development of the site is proposed. The proposed forest conservation plan is forward thinking in that it creates a buffer to adjacent residentially used and zoned property by retaining and infilling existing forest areas along the property lines adjoin those residential developments to the south, Nolan Village, and to the west, Greenberry Hills. The property has been non-compliant with the previous approved forest conservation plan since mass grading of the site began and then abruptly stopped due to the Great Recession. Staff required that forest conservation requirements for this development be calculated based on the 2005 Forest Conservation Plan's forest stand delineation and not based on current existing forest. The property was almost entirely forested back 12, 13 years ago when the development started, and a lot of that was removed. And we thought that since the previous plan was approved based on that stand, that's how they should calculate this. I've checked this, by the way, with DNR, my representative at DNR, Becky Wilson, and she concurred that that's the appropriate way to go. So even though there's a lot less existing forest on the property, they are getting themselves into compliance with the numbers based on the delineation created in 2005 or 6. Significant stands of trees depicted on the delineation were removed when mass grading began. The Forest Conservation Plan proposes the following approach to compliance. The property is 33.24 acres in area. The total forest as it existed in 2005 was 32.24 acres. Forest previously cleared or to be cleared is 25.01 acres. Forest retention and planning required based on that is 11.05 acres. They plan on dealing with this by retaining 7.23 of existing forest that's there now. Forest planting proposed of 1.69 acres, which basically infills areas along property lines and irregularities in the existing forest stands to create uniform buffer areas. And then there's going to be a balance of planting due of 2.13 acres. The applicant asked that the balance of planting, 2.13 acres, be held in abeyance pending the submission of development plans in the future. Ultimate configuration of any development of the site would impact how that remainder could be achieved. For example, if the tract is re-subdivided and Sweeney Drive is re-extended into the site, creating an industrial subdivision of multiple lots, they could obtain credit for street trees along the new extension of the road that they would be building. Otherwise, future compliance with that remaining 2.13 acres requirement might be met through strategic planting and expansion of existing easements, depending on the design of the future development, or perhaps contribution to the fee in lieu fund, or some combination of the two. Staff recommends approval of this approach. What's going on here is they're bringing the property, even without a development plan in the works to develop the site, they're bringing the plan far closer into compliance with the Forest Conservation Ordinance than it's been since 2006 or 7. So we believe this is major progress toward ultimate compliance, which they will make up the remainder of when they actually develop the site. No PRC meeting was held due to the current civil emergency. The following agencies have provided approval: Fire Marshal, Health Department, Light, Water, Wastewater, and Planning. The city engineer provided conditional approval. Staff recommends approval of the plat, subject to the conditional approval cited by the city engineer. Recommends approval of the Forest Conservation Plan, including deferral of 2.13 acres of compliance to be addressed with a future site plan or subdivision activity. A site plan or subdivision would be required to address this remainder. And in your packet, you have the comments from the city engineer's office. There are 2 points minor corrections they want to see made to the plat. And Jim Bender is listening in on this meeting. If you do have any questions on his comments, he is available remotely to address them. Looking at the plat, which you received, it's a 4-page plat. The first 2 pages basically just abandons everything. It wipes away the previous residential subdivision. And that includes wiping away the extension of Sweeney Drive into the site, which may or may not come back depending on how the property is redeveloped. Sheets 3 and 4 is the Forest Conservation Plan. And you'll notice on page 3, you have the existing forest areas that will be retained. There's the hatched areas that are surrounded by a thick black line. And then there's going to be infill planting where they're adjacent to those existing forest stands that are adjacent to residential areas. Mostly in the southern portion of the site, but it does run up the west side of the site. all the way up to the CSX Railroad right of way. And that's shown on page 2 of the plat. With that, Ed Shriver is available, and so is Jim Bender.
Any questions?
Just one question. There's no infrastructure other than the grading or any work been done there that would be destroyed if this was replatted and restaked for residential.
That's correct.
Steve, what is the zoning here now? It's changed a couple times.
Zoning is industrial.
Industrial now. It was residential, wasn't it? And before that, it was industrial.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? I agree with Steve. This is, I think this is a good proposal, and I think it hopefully will work out for the future and puts this property back in a good condition to go forward.
I think it's a good suggestion.
You want to make that motion?
I move that we accept the site plan as the final plat as submitted.
Second, this is Shelley.
We have an outstanding comment, do we not? City engineer.
Yes.
They're contingent upon satisfying the city engineer. Well, these are both just small stuff, but.
Yeah. I guess I.
All right, but there are outstanding.
I think the city engineer said he would like to see the lines more definitive.
Yeah, better drawings. Better
drawings. And also the second thing was providing, I guess this is just a clerical requirement, the Mylar copies of the recorded plat with a digital AutoCAD format in the digital AutoFlag format, and a copy submitted to the city engineer. That's normal what's done, isn't it, Jim?
That's correct. Even when they give us when Jim gives us a clean approval, that note is typically on their approval memo.
Okay, then I'll amend my my motion to include the request by the city engineer of providing the more visible lines for the vacated plat 9800. 9800.
Shelley, you're okay with that revision?
I am.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Then I declare that passing unanimously. Thank you.
Very much.
Our next one then is Burhan's Village. And hopefully, Steve asked for some drawings, also from the engineer late in the day. We all got those. And, well, yeah, you needed them.
Doug, if you don't mind, could we do that one that we added to the agenda because it's about a 2-minute item of it, allow Tony Taylor to get off?
All righty. Okay. Gee whiz. They don't want to stick around, huh? Okay. I have to apologize to you all for this one. Steve emailed me around 3 o'clock in the afternoon and asked me if this could be added because it was such a minor thing. And I didn't read it fully. I thought he was asking all of us or telling us. And so I didn't respond until he beat me upside the head about 4:30 and said, you haven't responded yet. So I apologize for you all getting this so late. But the way I viewed it is such a minor change myself, and we are up to date on the entire status of that project. So I apologize for the late notice on this.
This is follow-up on the forest conservation plans for building 1 and 3 of the North Point development, and also building 2 of the North Point development. On building 2, which you approved the site plan and the forest conservation plan in October, you left it to them at their request that they can meet the remaining 5 and some change acres of forest conservation, either through fee in lieu or off-site retention area at their choosing. They've chosen to do the retention area. They submitted a plat showing lands out along Licking Creek in the Becktonville area. They're going to do 10.56 acres of forest retention along Licking Creek. This is consistent with what you gave them the permission to do. I'm just running the plat by you. Should be no big issue. One little wrinkle in this is that as the development of building 1 went through the process and started moving forward, there was a miscalculation of some sort in the amount of fee in lieu that was needed to be paid for building 1. And they're short by 0.14 acres. And it's like a very tiny percentage of the overall forest conservation for that development, given how humongous it all is. But I had worked it out with Tony where it was so minor that I said, look, when you pay for fee in lieu for building 2, just pay them both at the same time and we'll follow up on it. And we both agreed to that. But since they're doing this easement, they thought, well, instead of doing the easement and doing a tiny amount of fee in lieu, a couple $1,000 for what's left of meeting the requirement for building 1, that they would just add some additional land to this easement, because an off-site approval. Staff is fine with it, don't have an issue. The problem was that when you reviewed the plan, it did not include approval of an off-site mitigation area. I didn't feel like I had the authority to do that administratively, so I'm putting it in front of you. Staff thinks it's perfectly fine. So what you would see is the plat that you have here with 10.56 acres. Tony can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe this just addresses the building 2. They would add another 0.28 acres because when you do off-site mitigation, you're supposed to do it a ratio of 2 to 1. So the 0.14 acres that they have a commitment to on building 1 that's left would double to 0.28. So they would add an extra 1/4 acre to this area, this property. So that line FL12 on that plat line most likely would just shift to the south a little bit. Staff recommends approval. Again, it's minor, but given what you saw, I didn't feel I had the administrative authority to approve going off site. And Tony's here if you have any questions.
I guess the only statement I would make is to make sure that what we're doing is detailed in the plats and so forth that are submitted as final documents. So there won't be any confusion later on as to what was done.
That makes perfect sense. I'll make sure that happens. Tony, do you have anything to add?
Anybody else?
Oh,
Yeah.
well, you got away even faster than I thought. Tony's not here, but I mean, he was on earlier.
Oh, okay.
He was.
Yeah, he's not on anymore.
Okay. Maybe he thought that this other case is gonna take a long time and he hopped off for a while. I don't know. Or maybe he just fell off. I don't know. There's really nothing to this though.
In that case, I'll make a motion that we accept the revisions as submitted.
Second.
Very good. We're all ready to vote? All's in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposed? And I'll rule it passed unanimously. Okay. Now we'll go to Burham.
I'm not sure what happened to my staff report. Thank you. Okay. And again, before I get started on this one, I know that we have some folks who haven't been around for the entire history of this property. I'm going to give you a little bit of background to it before I get started. There was a previous site plan approved for this property, similar to Linwood, back before the Great Recession hit. They got approval of a plan for I think it's like 83 townhouse condominium unit development. They got approval, they started clearing, and then the Great Recession hit, similar to Linwood. Development went fallow, but over time, this particular site, there must be something in the soil because it regenerated in the forest. There's a long history of the basic design of this, making sure that there's a connector road going through. What we have now is a fee simple townhouse development of much fewer lots than the 83 that the condos that the previous plan had. Keep in mind too that this is all a result of the the amendments that we did to the ordinance in the last cycle, I believe, where each single family home, duplex, semi-detached, and townhouse has to be on their own lots. So these are fee simple, and it's a cluster subdivision. A cluster subdivision allows them to reduce the area of the individual lots as long as it's equally offset with open space. So that's where we are on that. And I'm going to read the staff report into the record, some of which will be a bit redundant to what I just told you. But so this is subdivision development plan for Burhams Village, P 2019-01, with waiver requests and a revised forest conservation plan for FC 2016-09, formerly known as Deerfield Knolls. About 14 years ago, a developer obtained approval of an 82-unit townhouse condominium development through an approved community overlay. This has since expired. Only tree removal and some breeding occurred on the property before the development was derailed by the Great Recession. Concept plans have been before you in the past, including discussions on specific problematic elements of the design, and they were worked out to the point that the developer could move forward to the development plan stage. Given the location of the property, its topography, and its irregular shape, all have concluded that this is a difficult property for which an economically viable development plan could be created. The sketch plan called for a 48-unit fee simple townhouse development with a community center. Some adjustments were made as the development plan evolved, including removing the community center and replacing it with dwelling units, as well as finding a use for the remnant of land facing Carrollton Avenue at the request of staff. This proposal is for the construction of 52 fee simple townhouses and 7 buildings, plus 2 semi-detached dwellings to be constructed fronting Carrollton Avenue for a total of 54 dwelling units. No community center is proposed as part of this proposal. This is a cluster subdivision, meaning that the lots are less than the typically required minimum lot size required in the district. However, this is being offset with dedicated usable public open space. Let me rephrase that. When I say public, I mean public for the use of the people who are part of the homeowners association. It will not be public. It's not public technically. Open space areas with walkways, benches, and a top lot are provided. There will be one public street which will connect Mitchell Avenue with North Burhams Boulevard. Due to a variety of factors, including prolific use of double width driveways and fronts of units, and the horizontal and vertical geometry of the street, no on-street parking will be permitted. The 4 units replacing the community center will have private assigned parking next to their building. There's an 8-space parking lot just to the north of it, and they will be assigned to each of those units. 2 additional lots will provide 24 additional parking spaces for visitors to the development. 2 forest retention areas will be located in the western portion of the property. The existing platted alley right-of-way along the west edge of the property will be improved, connecting the new subdivision street with Fremont Street. Regarding the cluster requirements, the 52 townhouse and 2 semi-detached lots would normally require a minimum lot area of 136,000 square feet total. The total proposed lot area is 106,182 square feet, leaving a requirement of 29,818 square feet or 0.68 acres of open space to be provided. Up to 25% of this can be forest retention. Usable open space in the amount of 0.51 acres is provided with the trails, benches, and tot lot. Additional open space between buildings and along the railroad right-of-way, adjacent to streets and forest retention areas brings the total open space provided to 1.36 acres, well in excess of that necessary to compensate for the reduced lot areas. Waiver requests. The following requests for waivers of provisions of Article 5 are requested by the developer. In each case, they were discussed at prior planning commission meetings and were generally agreed as being necessary to implement a reasonable development plan for this site. However, official waiver requests had not previously been processed, so they are added for review. But again, they've all been discussed before. First one is parking stall length. The requirement is 18 feet. The request is to permit parts of those parking stalls to extend into the street rights of way. And let me deviate from the script there for a minute. One of the concerns that, for those of you who aren't familiar with the history of this property, one of the concerns in creating this development is trying to figure out a way to keep people from parking across the sidewalks like we have out at Collegiate Acres. They have single width driveways that go to garages, which means you got to jockey cars in and out, et cetera. And of course, we're dealing with the narrow nature of the site. So the road design that you see with the driveway configuration is what resulted, which is pretty much the commonly understood between the city engineer, ourselves, and yourselves. What is probably the best approach to prevent parking across the sidewalks? But what it does do is it does cram it up against the street right away. So in some of those cases, the driveway extends to the sidewalk. There's a little bit of space between the sidewalk and the edge of the right of way. So maybe 16 feet of parking space is actually on their property, and the other 2 feet are in the right of way behind the sidewalk. So that's what we're dealing with there. Returning to the script, parking lot buffer 10 feet, in places it'll be 0 feet. Sidewalks are required on both sides of the street. There's a waiver request to have sidewalks just on one side of the street in the western portion up against Mitchell. And that is due to the unique nature of that part of the site. It's choked down and narrow. There's a stormwater management area there, plus irregular property lines and property. So you'll have sidewalk on the north side all the way through, and then you'll have sidewalk on the south side from Burhan's back to the through the development to the alley. But between the alley and Mitchell Avenue, there will be no sidewalk on the south side of the street. It's probably 150 feet or so, maybe. Street trees, the ordinance requires street trees be spaced at every 40 feet. However, this is reduced due to the heavy use of double driveways for townhouses. There will actually be very few in the way of street trees in the middle of the development. There are street trees proposed along Burbanks Boulevard, along Mitchell Avenue, even into the opening area of the alley access. And there are some on the New Street Peloton, but as you can see by the layout, the middle part of that development, there's just no place for street trees. Forest conservation. The 2006 forest stand delineation showed that there was 5.11 acres of forest on the 6.21 acre tract. The site was stripped 14 years ago and has since regenerated in the new forest, probably more than the previous 5.11 acres. To be consistent with application of the ordinance to the amount of forest when the property was originally submitted for development, the 5.11 acres described in the 2006 delineation is used. This is consistent with the application of the ordinance applied to the revised forest conservation plan for Linwood Hollow. which was before you earlier in this meeting. In order to comply with the requirements of the ordinance, the applicant proposes the following. Project area is 6.21 acres. Total forest was 5.11 acres. We're not exactly clear exactly how much was cleared and how much wasn't. But the forest retention and planting requirement based on the amount of forest that was there and what will be proposed to have here is 3.54 acres. They'll be retaining 0.45 acres. That's mostly in the dark, that's the dark green areas that you see on the exhibit on the screen. Street tree credit, 62 street trees would be a credit of 2.53 acres. And then there would be, they would make up the rest of it in a fee in lieu contribution for 0.56 acres. Agency reviews. The following agencies have provided approvals: planning, engineering, subject to attached comments, fire marshal, and the electric division. Approvals from water and wastewater divisions are pending and will be provided at the meeting. We do have conditional approvals from both of those, subject to minor drafting corrections. In the closing days of the review of this plan, staff discussion came up that discussed whether the tot lot is in a safe location. We have forwarded a copy of the plan to our new SEPTED contact at the police department and are awaiting back. This development is extremely tight. We checked with the engineer, Gordon Hockenberger, and there appears to be no other reasonable location to place it in the development. The open area next to the entrance to the alley was evaluated by the project engineer, Gordon, and in their assessment, it's too close to the street and there are grading issues that would make it difficult to move the lot to that location. We provided this to you for discussion purposes. A couple days ago, actually yesterday, I met up with our new police department representative since Gary Kendall retired. His name is Officer Mark Morris. And his recommendation would be to address that is two things. One would be to selectively thin the undergrowth of the forest retention area. So the people who are walking along the sidewalk or the people living in those units that back to that open space area can see through the forest all the way to the property line. And we're not saying turn it into a mowed environment or take out all undergrowth, because that's not really a forest environment, but to thin it to the point so it's clear that no homeless camps are set up in it. And then the second recommendation is that a fence be placed along the sidewalk that's between the tot lot and that overflow parking lot. That would deter somebody trying to do a grab and go with a kid playing in the tot lot. Somebody would have to walk all the way around that fence to get into the tot lot. And also what it would do is, since all those parking spaces are there, putting a fence there would also cut down on people just cutting through the tot lot if they are looking to go more toward the center of the development. It will force them to walk along the sidewalk and then take the trail along the back of the houses rather than cutting through the tot lot. We thought those were reasonable recommendations given the circumstances. Recommendation. Staff recommends approval subject to the conditions cited above, approval of the waivers, and approval of the forest conservation plan with use of fee in lieu for part of the requirement. This development is a result of compromise. Significant deviation from normal expectations were necessary in order for this property to have any development potential at all. Otherwise, the land would remain undeveloped, essentially not producing on the tax base, and be a constant source of community health and law enforcement action. This development is very compact. There will be no usable front yards, and there will be very little in the way of green space between the two rows of houses that line the new subdivision street. Therefore, the quality of this development will heavily depend on the architectural treatment of the front facades of these buildings. Due to the cluster provision use, the rear yards, the only green space each lot will have on their own property, will be very small. Space for decks will be limited or unavailable, and the ability to have garden sheds in most cases will be very unlikely. Given the peculiar nature of this development, staff strongly recommends that the developer include in their settlement packages with buyers the unique constraints associated with their lots in this development and the low likelihood that any variances would be possible to setbacks, etc. We do have notes that were embedded into the site plan that talk about this, but of course, nobody buying a house is going to go to the city hall and dig out the site plan and look at it. But at least it puts the developer on notice. But we're letting you all know because if you look at any individual lot here, the entire front yard's a parking pad, with the exception of maybe a 3-foot planting bed across the front of the house. The backyards are anywhere from 20 to 25 feet deep. Ground level decks or patios are fine. They're not subject to setbacks, but elevated decks on most of these houses are not going to comply with the setback. They have very, very little in the way of extra rear yards in some of these cases. So people need to understand that if you're buying one of these houses, you're not going to throw a 15-foot deep deck onto the back of one of these, most of these townhouses. There's just the unique associated with this property and the employment of the use of the cluster subdivision. Just a couple of additional things. I'll walk you a little bit through the development here. If you remember that remnant land that's over in the southern part of the development near North Burhans that fronts on the Carrollton, we had conversations about that would just kind of become an overgrown area that everybody ignores. It would be a cut through area. So the developer is putting a duplex or two semi-detached dwellings there. They'll be each on their own lot. This is kind of the best circumstance. However, their backyards do face Peloton Street, the new street, and the plan shows that each of these yards will have a privacy fence that will go up to the street right away. Because if you look at these yards, they are quite small, and they're going to have absolutely no privacy. So Parks and Plan will have both of these houses have privacy fences in their backyard. That actually works because the townhouse does not have a front setback requirement. The front setback requirement for townhouse is 0. So even though this is a 3 lot, since Peloton is not a higher classified street, technically the front setback on Peloton for that is likewise 0. So you can have a privacy fence up to the right of way on Peloton for those 2 lots. The open space that we calculated out is the lighter green area that has a walking trail through it. It has benches. It has the top lot. Also, we calculated a portion of that dark green large forest conservation area as part of that open space. That's what we use to offset the reduced lot areas. But there are open space areas that are located around the property that are kind of more remnants than anything, but technically they're open. For example, along where the railroad track crosses under Burhans, or is it over under? It crosses Burhans. Behind that little parking lot, there's some open space there. There's a 10-foot wide strip of land that runs behind the townhouses up against the railroad right of way. And the purpose of that is that there's a provision in the subdivision ordinance that says that a interior unit of a townhouse has to open to another street, an alley, or an open space area. That way you don't have to trespass onto somebody's property to get out of your backyard if you're locked out of your house, essentially. There is a 6-foot tall vinyl fence that will go on the outside of that 10-foot strip along the top of the railroad cut. That area is known as Angles Cut. And behind those houses, it just drops down into the railroad line. So there's going to be a privacy fence that runs along the backs of those 3 sticks of houses. Let's see if there's anything else here that jumps out at me. You have another parking lot. There's some more open space up toward Mitchell on either side where that parking lot is, and then across Peloton from where the parking lot is. And there's also some open space up toward where the entrance of the development is on Burhans. Those are kind of remnant areas, but they technically qualify. But we also don't count those remnants in meeting that open space requirement for the cluster subdivision. The offset is met by that large green area that you see behind on the southern portion of the property and the trails leading into it. I think that's about it. Unless you have any questions, I figure at this point we'll turn it over to Gordon Poffenberg unless you have questions for me first.
Well, we'll ask those after Gordon.
Okay.
No, I think Steve did a fantastic job there with the summary. I think he explained it pretty well. This is pretty much a sketch plan that was approved about 9 months ago. Not much changes to layout other than the drop of the community center for units 51 to 54.
I have a few questions then.
Okay, Doug.
The curbing in front of the house, was that going to be a soft curb so they can drive over it? Is that what?
Yes, it'll be mountable curb.
Okay. Can you kind of describe the retaining wall number 1 and number 2?
I believe there's only one retaining wall now.
Oh, the drawing
There's a
shows.
retaining wall. Go ahead.
There's one behind the northern or the western stormwater management pond between it and the railroad.
Yeah.
And there's another one shown down behind lot numbers 5 and 6. That's wall number 2.
Wall number 2 was eliminated. We revised the grading to eliminate that wall. The only wall we have at this time is in stormwater management pond number 2. That's going to be up to the contractor to decide what the most economical construction will be. But basically the pond is along the railroad right away to provide some additional storage in the pond.
Oh, that's my least objectionable or concerning location. So I'm not all that hyped about that either. But I was concerned about wall number 2. Going to the tot lot. I know this is an additional expense to the developer, but could we require a see-through fence material, such as the vertical elements, along the parking lot, and then along the sidewalk that's on the north side of that, with just an opening, a 4 foot, 5 foot, 6 foot opening in that fence? What I'm getting at is, if someone's going to snatch a child, they have to go through that opening and that opening only. And it's an opening that's probably going to be most visible, somewhere behind, say, lot 20. And then the closing that in with a chain link fence along the forest conservation line.
Adam, you want to speak to that? Adam Shaul, are you still there?
Sorry, I forgot I have to
Steve had the
unmute.
discussion
I
with-
apologize. You guys just have to an opening is fine. You guys would just have to quantify like the linear feet and the, materials you guys want us to use. We're open to anything. So, Gordon, can you guesstimate what they're asking exactly?
It'd probably be a couple hundred feet of fence. I think the discussion Steve had with the Hagerstown Police Department, they were requesting fence along the parking spaces. I had a conversation with Steve earlier, probably last week. I don't think in today's day and age, anybody would let their kid go to a tot lot unaccompanied. We talked about moving the tot lot to other locations, but this seemed to be the most logical space to be away from the street, to be away from traffic. I think the fence along the parking spaces is reasonable, but Adam, if you want to do, if you're comfortable with the rest of it, that's fine with me.
I'm suggesting a chain link fence then along the forest conservation side, so as to at least minimize that. I'd rather see one along the pathway with just, as I said, a wide opening. But I don't, I wouldn't say that has to happen, but it would be nice if it did. But I certainly think I agree with the police. But that should be that one along the parking lot. I still think that should be something that is relatively hard to climb but see-through. So I was going to leave that up to you all to decide what you want to do.
Okay.
Staff would suggest a 5 or 6 foot tall aluminum fence, vertical pickets like where the building was torn down on West Washington Street a year or so ago. Along Washington Street, they have they basically,
Yeah, I know which one it is.
It's
It's beside my dad's old building. I know which one it is.
Yeah.
Staff would recommend something like that. It's attractive, it can be seen through, and it's hard to climb.
I mean,
Is
we're
5 or
open to
6?
anything. I'm not going to say, yes or no necessarily. I mean, is there any other comments besides that? Requirements?
The only thing else I would think about and is some kind of lighting in that top lot also. I know that most parents, if not all parents, would be sure that their child is not out there after dark or unaccompanied. But if you live in the neighborhood where I work, that happens.
I believe there's 3 street lights in the parking lot, aren't there?
Yes, there's 3 streets. There's three street lights along the back of that sidewalk.
Well, then that's pretty good. All right, I didn't know that. All right, so I don't know whether we're not approving this now, right?
Yeah.
We are, okay. All right.
My concern is, would that be enough lighting for people who, not just kids, but adults who are parking there at night, having to walk that distance of that parking lot to their homes?
It's about a light every 6 parking spaces.
And there's lights along both sides of Peloton. There's 3 lights along those parking spaces, and then there's another light along the alley closer to Peloton Street. And this lighting design has been reviewed by the Hagerstown Light Department.
It's fine with me.
Okay.
They know more about lights than I do. Well, I asked the maker of the motion, if someone wants to make the motion, to consider my recommendation or my request that we make that lot a little more secure. I think thinning out the forest conservation area, that's going to be relied upon the HOA at some time. And not all HOAs perform as well as hoped. And I'm trying to be sure that we don't have something 3 years and 5 years from now that isn't what we intended.
We could put that as a condition on the site plan and also as a note on the forest conservation plan.
I'd like that fence to be something sturdy that not only would be protection, but keep the kids from enjoying climbing it just for fun.
I think that fencing that Steve talks about would take care of that.
Yeah, we put it up before. We put it up around our pool at one of our other rec centers, and nobody climbs it for the last 12 years. So
yeah,
good.
That's the design that's actually recommended by the police department and SEPTED as specifically because it's hard to climb.
Yep.
Because when I was a kid, and I'm going to tell on myself, chain link fence didn't stop us, whether it was 6 foot or 10 foot, from getting over into the field that we wanted to get to.
So
and,
noted.
Two bounds, and I'm short, and I was already at the top of the fence.
You know it. I have a question about the crosswalk. What was the concern about placing one?
I'm drawing a blank, a concern about the crosswalk.
It was
Well, the original design had a community center, and we had a crosswalk basically between units 6 and 51 that would get you across the street to the community center. Once the community center was eliminated, we didn't feel the need for the crosswalk because we had sidewalk that went all the way down to Burhan's Boulevard. The city's criteria for a mid-block crosswalk is pretty stringent with warning lights and signage and raised hump and everything. And it really is cost prohibitive. And with the elimination of the community center, we just didn't feel it was warranted.
Unless he's hopped off, by the way, Jim Bender is part of the meeting.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's sort of a double-edged sword. Mid-block crosswalks are a problem because they are generally considered to be a safety hazard. If you're not at an intersection or where cars would normally expect to have to stop or look for pedestrians, then they're discouraged. But the city does have a policy for allowing mid-block crosswalks to be installed, but we do require that they meet certain criteria. And part of what Gordon said is correct. That criteria can include beacons or warning lights. It can require the crosswalk to actually be raised like a speed hump. A number of different things that try to slow vehicles down and make them aware that this is a place where pedestrians may be crossing. And I think that it's double-edged in this case because we don't like mid-block crosswalks, but we also look at this development and think about a family that's living in lot 51 or 52, which is the closest to Burhan's on the south side or the east side of the road, and trying to think about, okay, they've got children and they want to take them to the tot lot. How do they get there? Well, unless they're going to cross the street without a crosswalk or at a place where we really don't want them crossing, then they're going to be forced to walk the whole way up the east side of the street, up along Peloton, to some point up, well, really to the crosswalk up at Mitchell, and then do a 180 and come back down and maneuver over to the tot lot. So, we're sort of torn because we don't like mid-block crosswalks in general, but just thinking about this development and how usable it's going to be for the residents, we're thinking that maybe there would be some benefit to having some sort of mid-block crossing somewhere. But, as Gordon says, that does bring into some design elements, that does bring in some additional costs. That's certainly true. But I think we just made that comment because we wanted to point it out to the Planning Commission that from a usability standpoint, the layout of the development is not greatest if you want to get to the tot lot.
Jim, what about the walkway that, at least it looks like a walkway, that goes along lot 8 and sort of runs in a westerly direction and then along the forest conservation area to the tot lot?
Yeah, that's actually where generally the mid-block crosswalk on Peloton was proposed to be, somewhere right in that area where the community center used to be. But without the community center and the way it's designed now, there's not a crossing, there's not a crosswalk proposed there.
Now, I understand people will have to go across the street and perhaps without a crosswalk, but it does seem to me that the fact that the road Peloton curves so strongly to the right, if you come in off of Burhan's Boulevard, I think I don't see this as the kind of street that's gonna have people driving up and down there very fast.
Well, yeah, I certainly hope not. We've required them to paint a center line down the street to make it clear that there is no on-street parking. And we're going to have speed limit signs certainly posted. It's just our experience has been that regardless of what the posted speed limit is, people tend to do what they want to do. And so if you're going to do a crosswalk there, then we would definitely want it to meet our mid-block crosswalk criteria with beacons or have it as a raised sort of speed hump crosswalk, that sort of thing. I mean, I don't disagree that residents are going to cross the street. They're not going to walk the whole way up to Mitchell and then come back down on the other side to get to the tot lot. They're going to seek the path of least resistance, but that's not something that we want to encourage.
And
Well,
if you put a crosswalk there, somebody 2 doors down is going to cross in the middle of the block anyhow.
I think you're right, Doug. I don't really see much benefit to a crosswalk in this situation. I mean, I understand the trade-off, Jim, and you're right, but I suspect a crosswalk is not going to make things a whole lot safer.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're just, it's always that balance between trying to do something that we feel is safe and meets the standards, and then also being realistic and thinking about human behavior and what's actually going to happen. So I think that's why our letter, our final review letter was an approval letter, but we just wanted to make that comment for the record that that's something that the Planning Commission should consider.
Any other questions or concerns?
There's just a couple things I wanted to point out that I forgot in my previous presentation. One is along behind lots 1 through 8, there's going to be an easement, a pedestrian easement across the backs of those lots, because if you notice, those property lines run right to the property line, which means that violates the provision in the ordinance about not having, or that the townhouse lot, interior townhouse lot has to back to a alley or an open space. This was arranged in prior discussions. I'm just refreshing everybody's memory on it. So the purpose or the intent of people being able to get off of their property without having to trespass, in this particular case, the backyards are actually a little bit bigger, and there's going to be an easement running across that property line. So say if you're in lot 4 and you're in your backyard and you wanted to get off the property without going through the house, you go to the back of your property and there's a pedestrian easement across that property line. You go left or right to get off of your property. So that's how that's being addressed. And then the other thing is there will be signs placed in the development on each end of Peloton Street telling people not to park across sidewalks, and if so, your car will be towed.
That's all you can do.
Yep.
Okay, so it looks to me as though first we have the way, I mean, if we're ready to consider a motion, the first thing would be to deal with the waiver requests.
Yes.
All right, I make the motion that we approve the 5 waiver requests requested by the developer as outlined. I guess it's on page 2 of your memo, Steve.
Yep.
I'll second that.
All right, so we want to handle this as a separate motion. Any discussion on this motion itself to stipulate the final approval? These waiver requests are granted. We ready to vote?
Yes.
All those in favor of this, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Then that motion passes unanimously. Where do you want to go next, Jim?
Well, I mean, we have a forest conservation plan, do we not?
That is,
I mean, is that something that should be a separate motion?
we don't,
I'm less concerned about that than I am with making sure waivers are approved before you approve the plan. If you wanted to make a motion with the site plan and the forest conservation at once, you could. In this case, though, it's so complex, maybe you ought to break it out. Let's do forest conservation first and then do the site plan.
Okay. All right, I make a motion that we approve the forest conservation plan, but with the suggestion that, or I guess the requirement, that there be some kind of a fence along the northern line of the forest conservation area that lines up with the interior walkway that goes to the top lot. Is that what you were talking about, Doug?
yeah, I was looking for at least to have two sides of that tot lot fenced. I think that could be in the site plan though.
Okay, fine. We can do that in the site plan.
Is there a second to Jim's motion on approval of the forest conservation?
Second.
And that's the use of fee in lieu, correct?
Fee in lieu, yes.
Okay.
That's okay with the maker and the seconder?
Yes.
I have one question though, and I forgot to bring this up earlier. The area number 2, does that meet the minimum requirements for size?
Yes. It's a little irregular, but it meets, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Just to clarify that, what was that statement you made there after the motion was made, Doug?
That we're allowing the developer to do fee in lieu of for the balance that can't be met with on site. And I asked about the forest conservation area number 2, which is down near Clarington Avenue on the southern portion of the property.
Okay.
And I asked if it was
That
appropriate.
little dark area there?
Yeah, and I asked if that was a appropriate size, and Steve said, yes, that is.
Okay.
It's also contiguous to another piece of forested property that has undetermined ownership.
Yeah,
That
Oh,
piece
yeah.
of, that triangular piece at the end of Carrollton Avenue, apparently nobody owns it. So that combined with what we're adding there is gonna be, I guess, forest forever.
but it won't be in a conservation. He's under a conservation easement. But it, in fact, it will be, yes.
Right.
Okay, do we understand the motion?
Yes,
Everybody okay with it?
understand it now.
We ready to vote? All in favor then of that motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? I rule that was unanimous. The record show. So that brings us now to the main site plan.
I will take a shot at the motion.
Thank you.
I hope I get it all, but I make a motion that we approve the site plan with the following stipulations. First, the wait a minute. First, that there be appropriate, I guess, a chain link fence along the larger forest conservation area that delineates it from the interior walkway. Second, that
Jim,
Yeah.
I was just, if you can do that if you want to, but I was trying to secure the tot lot. So I was looking for a fence that would go down along the forest conservation, between the forest conservation and the tot lot.
Oh, okay.
Not necessarily the rest of the way.
Let me restate that. That there be a fence that goes along the, I guess, the western boundary of the tot lot that separates it from the parking area, and that it be built out of some sort of material that allows one to see through it.
Fine.
And I'm trying to think that
And a chain link fence along the forest conservation area between it and the tot lot. So there's two of the three sides are fenced in.
correct. Okay, so that's two things.
You have a minimum height on that fence?
Let's make it 6 feet.
6 feet, yeah.
I'm trying to remember if there were any other things. Those are the only two I can remember right now.
Those are the only two I remember also, Jim.
Okay,
What
so that's
about
my motion.
What about the opening?
Oh, yes, that the fence have one opening.
Well, if we just do the two of the three sides, the third side, the side closest to the houses will remain open.
Okay,
I would suggest that's a good idea, because otherwise then it's completely enclosed and it feels like a pen.
Yeah.
right. Okay. All right, that's my motion.
And you'll be subject to conditionals from water and sewer.
And, yes,
Did you second that one also?
Yes,
Are you okay then? With that
yes, I'm
revision
okay.
about water
Yeah.
and sewer?
with,
Okay,
with the two fences and the stipulations from water and sewer.
thank you. All righty, is everybody clear on the motion then? Made and second. Any discussion before we vote? All those in favor then, please say aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposed? That passes unanimously also.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
good luck. I hope this time it actually goes forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
All righty. We now have one small planning commission business, and that is approval of the proposed agenda for 2021. Bring it on.
Okay.
And the reason why you moved September 8th to September 1?
There's probably a Jewish holiday in there, probably Rosh Hashanah or one of the other ones. Yom Kippur, one of those.
Motion to approve.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Oh, I'm assuming everybody's going to be in favor. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously also.
Debbie, can we have some cookies now?
I'm trying to stay away from those things. Thank you all very much for your time. It's very tedious. I'd much rather do this in person, and wish you all a Merry Christmas, but this is where we're at. So bring on 2021. Hopefully it's better. Y'all have a great Christmas. Thank you very much for your time.
You too.
You
You
too.
too, Doug.